This is quite a story. I was walking across the bridge one day and I saw a man standing on the edge and he was about to jump off. So I ran over and I said, wait, stop, don't do it. Why shouldn't I? He said, well, there's so much to live for. And he said, like what? Well, are you religious or atheist? Religious. Oh, me too. Are you Christian or Buddhist? Christian. Christian, me too. Are you Catholic or Protestant? Protestant. Me too. Are you Methodist or Baptist? Baptist. Oh, wow, me too. Are you Baptist Church of God or Baptist Church of the Lord? Baptist Church of God. Me too. Are you Original Baptist Church of God or are you Reformed Baptist Church of God? Reformed Baptist Church of God. Me too. Are you Reformed Baptist Church of God Reformation 1879 or Reformed Baptist Church of God Reformation of 1915? Reformed Baptist Church of God Reformation 1915. Die, you heretic scum, I said, and I pushed him off.
Oh my gracious, we are so divided, aren't we? Just a couple of weeks ago, the news reported that more than 6,000 United Methodist congregations, a fifth of the U.S. total, have now received permission to leave the denomination amid a schism over theology and the role of LGBTQ plus people in the nation's second largest Protestant denomination. Congregations started leaving in 2019 when the church created a 4-year window of opportunity for U.S. congregations to depart over LGBTQ plus related issues. And it cascaded to its highest level this year. It's the 4th year, their last chance. Even though the Methodist Church law forbids the marriage or ordination of self-avowed practicing homosexuals in their language, many churches have defied that ban, leading to the exodus of many conservatives who have joined the global Methodist Church. Perhaps with this exodus, the next time they discuss and decide such issues, they will be more representative of liberal Protestantism. For the Lutherans, a similar split occurred in 2010. I remember that because my mother was Lutheran, and their church was wrestling over which way to go on LGBTQ plus inclusion and calling a minister who might be LGBTQ. My mom's pastor called homosexuality an abomination, while gay members sat in the pews, and certainly many congregants had gay family members. She was torn up about it. Here was her minister, her church's leader, saying one thing, and her children were saying something else. I looked at their website just recently, and it turns out that they did join the North American Lutheran Church, an anti-gay synod. It breaks my heart. Earlier this past week, I heard a story on NPR about the Southern Baptists being confronted by their members for preaching what Jesus taught. Russell Moore, a former leader of the Southern Baptist Convention, told NPR, I think if we're going to get past the blood and soil sorts of nationalism or all the other kinds of totalizing cultural identities, it's going to require rethinking what the church is. He said he's heard from many pastors with similar stories about quoting the Sermon on the Mount, especially when they preach, especially that part, turn the other cheek, only to have someone come up after the service and say, where did you get those liberal talking points? Moore said what was alarming to him is that when the pastor would say, well, I'm literally quoting Jesus Christ, the response would not be, I apologize. The response would be, yes, but that doesn't work anymore. It's too weak. And when we get to the point, he said, where the teachings of Jesus himself are seen as subversive to Protestants, then we're in a crisis. But really, it is more than the schisms and divides within individual faith traditions that concern me today. It is about the violence against people of other faiths, using faith as a reason to cause someone harm or as a place to target people you think you hate for their race, religion, or ideology. The Black church has had more than enough violence. The most memorable incidents were the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, that killed 4 young girls in 1963, and the Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, where 9 people were killed. Even our UU churches have not been immune. The Knoxville, Tennessee Valley UU Church had a gunman enter and kill 2 and injure 6 because he hated liberals. And just a few weeks ago, the community church in Plano, Texas was firebombed for the same reason. Fortunately, the damage was light and no one was injured. Religion has been used as a proxy for hate and violence since the beginning of time, and it seemed to ramp up after 9/11. Now, I have agreed with very little of what George W. Bush said, but after Islamic extremists flew airplanes into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon in 2001, he said, "Don't let extremists hijack a perfectly good religion." But people didn't heed his warnings. After 9/11, violence against Muslims rose dramatically and is still very present. In Wisconsin, on August 5th, just a couple weeks ago, as the anniversary, 2012, a gunman shot up a Sikh temple, thinking that Sikhs were Muslim. Then this year alone, there have been 6 attacks on Muslim mosques in Minnesota. And of course, there is the hatred against Jews. Just a few weeks ago, the gunman that shot up the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue was convicted and sentenced. The shooting that happened on October 27th, 2018, left 11 people dead. This one felt personal to me. On that date, I was officiating a memorial service for the wife of a mixed-faith Christian-Jewish couple in Cincinnati. They married in the UU Church in the 60s because no other place would conduct the ceremony between 2 faiths. The couple wasn't really active as UUs or Christians or Jewish, but some in the family were practicing Jews, including one son who was a rabbi. We had a beautiful interfaith service, complete with the mourner's Kaddish in Hebrew that the son led. After we cleaned up and headed for home, I heard the news of the shooting. I called the family to express my condolences yet again. And interestingly, the family came back this year to memorialize the husband who died. In our UU space, we had the memorial just as we did before, and this was just as the trial of the gunman was underway. Violence has always been how we solve our differences in this country, but it is becoming more and more and more acceptable among extremists as a way of terrorizing and eliminating people they don't like: Muslims, Jews, and liberal Christians. Was there ever a time when we could live in peace across our religious differences? The Reverend Susan Ritchie chronicles a history that gives me hope that there were better times and there could be again. In her book, Children of the Same God, she has explored the relationship between Unitarians, Jews, and Muslims. We assume, an assumption Ritchie calls into question, that Christianity and Judaism parted ways to become distinct religions in the 2nd century. She writes, "The idea that a carefully patrolled boundary existed between Christianity and Judaism so early ignores how both traditions continued to be shaped and developed through long-lasting and considerable interchange." She writes that what matters for Unitarian history is that insisting on a clear demarcation between Judaism and Christianity essentially erases the monotheists who continued to identify as Christian. Unitarians. Unitarianism, she writes, emerged as one expression of such a liberal Christianity, intentionally honoring a close kinship with Judaism and Islam. In other words, Unitarians, Jews, and Muslims were able to work together without hate. Ritchie developed her interest in this topic during seminary. She tells the story of attending a non-progressive seminary in which the history class reenacted the Council of Nicaea. During the reenactment, students really got into the roles, including carrying signs that said, "Kill the heretic Arians." These were seminary students, just to remind you. Arians were named for Arius, a Unitarian who argued way back in 325 that Jesus and God were not one and the same, hence Unitarian. Well, these students who were play acting quickly resurrected these ancient animosities. Ritchie realized how inaccurate the history was, but also how we humans go along with oppression so easily. After all, she wrote, a homogenized and consolidated Christianity would make for both a better vehicle and expression of empire, power. That Council of Nicaea in 325 was the first legal separation of Christianity from Judaism. The early church had permitted multiple understandings of the nature of Jesus, but after Nicaea, it became necessary for Christians to subscribe to a creed asserting that God and Jesus shared the same divine substance. Jesus was God. Never before had Christians holding on to a Unitarian theology been so clearly labeled heretics and so severely punished for heresy. They were declared anathema, cast out of the church, and denied any possibility of salvation. Then in 381, the Council of Constantinople added the Holy Spirit to the creed, completing the Trinity. During this time of anti-Unitarian sentiment, anti-Jewish sentiment also grew. For example, Easter was separated from Passover, previously a shared ritual. And like the Jews and Christians before them, when Islam began to grow, Muslims felt that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all shared a God. Beginning in about the year 1300, things developed, of course, over a long period of time. But this is when the Muslim Ottoman Empire out of Turkey gained control of a large section of Europe and held it for 600 years. The Ottomans were liberal, cosmopolitan, and pluralistic. Ritchie writes, as anti-Semitism increased elsewhere in Europe, Jews found the Ottoman Empire an enormously hospitable place, and a learned diaspora grew and thrived within its boundaries. Christians enjoyed a similar welcome in Ottoman society, especially those fleeing persecution by other Trinitarian Christians. Now, Europeans were kind of afraid the Ottomans and the Unitarians and Muslims might become allies. Ritchie says, cultural exchange is not viewed positively in times of change and fear. But the fear prevalent in Europe at that time gave birth to many of the forms of Islamophobia that still plague us today. There was plenty of pushback and fake news back in those days, but there was also the good news of cultural enmeshment. She writes, Lutheran clergy converted to Islam, Turks and Hungarians marrying and having children together, and Europeans locating to the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Ritchie argues that religious toleration came not just from the leaders of the political influences of the day. Rather, religious toleration was rooted in the everyday lives of actual people who were already living in multi-religious and multicultural ways. Contemporary Unitarians often draw courage from our European ancestors during those times. One story you may remember from the 1500s was when Michael Servetus lived and wrote The Errors of the Trinity. In that book, Servetus praises Islam's acceptance of Jesus as a prophet and regrets that Christianity does not return the favor by acknowledging Muhammad. He expresses concern that the doctrine of the Trinity made a laughingstock of Christianity. Servetus, who is considered our Unitarian martyr, was burned at the stake for his writings in 1553 with his books piled around his feet. Ritchie tells another story. It's by Jacob Paleologus of that same era. In the story, Jacob creates an imaginary church in one of his writings that included Christians, Jews, and Muslims. In this fantasy, Pope Pius is summoned from the deepest level of hell and made to admit that he exercised his authority ruthlessly and unfairly, and that he seriously misunderstood Scripture. In the debate, heavenly elders, including Jesus himself, have asked God to intervene to prevent what they see as excessive and even cruel attempts to foist Jesus' divinity on the church. Somewhat unfairly, perhaps, the debate is presided over by the Transylvanian king John Sigismund, a Unitarian. Not surprisingly, the anti-Trinitarians win the argument in this fantasy. I kind of wish Ritchie's seminarians had acted out that little play. Now, King Sigismund could have followed what other kings did and establish a national religion. But instead, he made it legal for people to practice their own traditions, choose their own preachers, and prevent manipulation by the state. Preachers could teach their own understandings of the gospel. Ritchie said, "This is not a story about Ottoman history with a few footnotes about Unitarians, nor is it a story about Unitarian history with a few footnotes about the Ottomans. Rather, it is the story of a place where these two cultures creatively mixed and mingled." The open-mindedness was declared by King Sigismund after much debate in the Edict of Torda in 1568. It reads, part of it is, "In every place the preachers shall preach and explain the gospel, each according to his understanding of it, and if the congregation like it, well. If not, no one shall compel them, for their souls would not be satisfied. But they shall be permitted to keep a preacher whose teaching they approve. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone, and it is not permitted that anyone should threaten anyone else by imprisonment, for faith is a gift of God." Eric Cherry, who led the UU Global Religions Partner Church Program, wrote something for the UU World about this 450th anniversary of the Edict of Torda, which was in 2018. He writes, "There is so much that the Edict of Torda points to that our tradition continues to rely upon. The grounding commitment that faith is not endowed with purpose by governments or empires, but by the sacred, the holy, that a free pulpit and a free pew are necessities for free religious communities. Even the stirrings of our commitment to resist authoritarianism as a religious practice is signaled in the edict. It is clear to 21st century UUs that the Edict of Torda did not go far enough because it really only singled out 4 faiths, but it was an important step on a pathway to freedom and reform that continues today. We often think of the Edict of Torda as the first declaration of religious tolerance. It was when Unitarianism was officially recognized for the first time, 1568. the first time in the history of the world. And that proclamation is the beginning of our legacy to be a spiritual tradition that resists hatred, oppression, and the narrow view that there's only one way to be faithful, to be religious, to be free. There's a lot of complexity in this history, and I have had to leave very much out, including influences from Italy and Poland and other martyrs like Francis de Vide. But one of the big ideas is that the Creed of Nicaea that so effectively divided Christians from everyone else did not stop people from mingling and relating in peace, accomplishing things in community, and sharing ideas. Of course, there's also the bloodshed and persecution that has occurred in all those years. I think it is useful to remember the history of healthy border crossing and mutual support. We can get very caught up in the violence, like I did at the start of this service. But Ritchie argues that the world's religions and cultures have been more enmeshed in creative conflict, mutual attraction, and reciprocal influence than scholarship has fully imagined or revealed. We have yet to assemble the full puzzle, of course, but as we do, we must take care that the histories we produce of different ethnicities and religions and cultures acknowledge that the boundaries between them have been continually negotiated and crossed. And we will want to pay special attention to those such as the early European Unitarians who made their home in the borderlands. Ritchie argued that cultural exchange is not viewed positively in times of change and fear like we are in right now, which is why we need to encourage more cultural exchange today. She also said that religious toleration came not just from the leaders of the political influences of the day, rather, it was rooted in the everyday lives of actual people who are already living in multi-religious and multicultural ways. So let us engage with others across the borderlands. The Northern Michigan Common Ground and Interfaith Group in Petoskey, Harbor Springs, and Charlevoix is a good start. It includes Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and Unitarian Universalists. They especially focus on economic issues. Their website says that in Emmett County in 2019, 36% of the people are economically vulnerable households and in poverty, 36%. They say that means that 1 in 3 people you meet around town, or the person helping you onto the ski lift, or the person watching your children during the day meet this description. We can cross religious borders to deal with poverty, can't we? A quick web search also revealed the Cedar Tree Institute in Marquette, a nonprofit offering services and projects in mental health, interfaith collaboration, and the environment. It is in partnership with the US EPA, the US Forest Service, and 5 American Indian tribes. There may be some opportunities here for border crossing for social and environmental change. People of faith that focus on mission and collaboration rather than on oppression and division can clearly make the world a better place. And as Ritchie said, we work locally to begin this kind of collaboration and healing. Think what a difference we could make if we set aside those artificial theological divides and instead focused on what we need to do to heal the world. May it be so. Amen.